Now I'm giving you the English version of the second Clint Eastwood story without headers, the plane crash story that made him fearless. Clint Eastwood was 21 years old when he looked down at the Pacific Ocean from the small military plane. The dark water stretched endlessly below him, and something felt wrong. The engine was making a strange noise. Pilot Ray Ellis turned to him with a worried expression. "Kid, we might have a problem." Those words would begin the most terrifying night of Clint's life. The night that would transform a young soldier into the fearless man who would become Hollywood's toughest legend. Now I'm going to tell you the story of how Clint Eastwood nearly died before he ever became famous. The plane crash that made him confront death at 21, and how that experience created the man who would never fear anything again. It was September 30th, 1951. Clint Eastwood was stationed at Fort Ord in California, serving his military duty during the Korean War. He was a young man from Oakland, dreaming of maybe becoming an actor someday, but for now he was just another soldier. That evening, Clint had gotten lucky. His friend Lieutenant Ray Ellis had offered to give him a ride back to base in a small Douglas AD Skyraider. It was supposed to be a routine flight from Seattle to California. "Hop in, kid," Ellis had said. "Better than taking the bus, right?" Clint climbed into the small cockpit. He had never been in a military aircraft before. The excitement was overwhelming. He was about to see the world from above. At 7 p.m. they took off from Seattle. The weather was clear, visibility was good. It was supposed to be a simple 3-hour flight. "Beautiful night for flying," Ellis said through the intercom. "You picked a good night for your first military flight." Clint looked down at the lights of the cities passing below. Everything looked peaceful, almost magical. He had no idea that in a few hours he would be fighting for his life. About an hour into the flight, Ellis noticed something wrong. The fuel gauge was dropping faster than it should. "That's strange," he muttered. "We might have a fuel leak." Clint felt his stomach tighten. "Is that serious?" "Could be. Let me check." Ellis ran through his instruments. The fuel was definitely leaking. Fast. "We need to get down," Ellis said, his voice now serious. "The nearest airport is 200 miles away. Can we make it?" Ellis calculated quickly. "It's going to be close. Very close." The next 30 minutes felt like hours. Ellis pushed the plane as hard as he could, trying to conserve fuel while maintaining altitude. Clint watched the fuel gauge drop steadily. "Ray, how much time do we have?" "Maybe 20 minutes, maybe less." The nearest airport was still 150 miles away. The math was simple and terrifying. As they flew over the California coast, Ellis made the announcement Clint had been dreading. "Kid, we're not going to make it to an airport. We're going down in the ocean." Clint felt his blood freeze. "In the ocean? At night?" "I'm going to try to bring us down as gently as possible. But you need to be ready." Ellis began going through emergency procedures, talking fast. "When we hit the water, get out immediately. Don't try to save anything. The plane will sink fast." Clint's mind was racing. He was a decent swimmer, but the Pacific Ocean at night? In September, the water would be freezing. "How far are we from shore?" "About 5 miles, in cold, dark water." It might as well have been 50 miles. "Ray, I don't know if I can swim 5 miles. "You can," Ellis said firmly. "You have to. Just keep moving, stay calm, and head toward the lights on shore." At 9:30 p.m., the engine finally gave out. The sudden silence was deafening. "Here we go," Ellis said. "Hold on." The plane began its glide toward the dark water below. Clint could see the white foam of the waves in the moonlight. They were coming down fast. "Remember, get out immediately," Ellis shouted. The impact was violent. The plane hit the water nose first, throwing both men forward. Water immediately began rushing into the cockpit. "Go! Go!" Ellis yelled. Clint forced open his door and dove into the icy water. The shock of the cold hit him like a sledgehammer. His entire body went numb instantly. He surfaced and looked around frantically. The plane was already sinking. Ellis was nowhere to be seen. "Ray! Ray!" Clint shouted. No answer, just the sound of water and wind. The plane disappeared beneath the surface, taking with it any hope of rescue equipment. Clint was alone in the vast Pacific Ocean. The first thing that hit him was the cold. The water temperature was about 60 degrees, cold enough to cause hypothermia within hours. His military uniform was already waterlogged, dragging him down. Clint looked toward the shore. He could see lights in the distance, but they seemed impossibly far away. 5 miles had never looked so long. He started swimming. The key was to pace himself, not to panic. But with every stroke, the cold sapped more of his strength. After 30 minutes, Clint realized he was in serious trouble. His arms felt like lead. His legs were cramping. The shore didn't seem any closer. "Come on, Clint," he said to himself. "You're not dying out here." He forced himself to keep swimming. Stroke after stroke. Don't think about the distance. Don't think about the cold. Just swim. An hour passed. Clint's body was beginning to shut down. Hypothermia was setting in. His thinking was becoming fuzzy. His movements were getting slower. The lights on shore seemed to be moving further away. Was he swimming in circles? Had he lost his direction? Panic began to set in. For the first time, Clint realized he might actually die out here. A 21-year-old kid, drowned in the Pacific Ocean. Body never found. "No," he said out loud. "Not like this." He thought about his family back in Oakland. His mother Ruth, his father Clint. They would never know what happened to him. He would just disappear. That thought gave him strength. He wasn't going to let that happen. Clint changed his strategy. Instead of trying to swim continuously, he began floating on his back for periods, conserving energy, then short bursts of swimming when he felt strong enough. 2 hours into his ordeal, something amazing happened. A wave lifted him higher than usual, and he could see more clearly. The lights on shore were definitely closer. "I can make this," he whispered through chattering teeth. But his body was failing. His arms were barely responding. His legs felt like concrete. Every breath was a struggle. 3 hours in the water. Clint was hallucinating from hypothermia. He thought he saw Ray Ellis swimming next to him. He thought he heard rescue helicopters. None of it was real. The only thing that was real was the shore, getting slowly, painfully closer. At some point, Clint later estimated around 1 a.m., his feet touched something solid, sand. He had made it to shallow water, but he couldn't stand. His legs wouldn't support him. He crawled on his hands and knees through the surf, dragging himself onto the beach. He collapsed on the sand, shaking uncontrollably from cold and exhaustion. He had been in the water for nearly 4 hours. "I made it," he whispered. "I actually made it." But he wasn't safe yet. It was the middle of the night. He was suffering from severe hypothermia, and he was on a deserted stretch of beach, with no idea where he was. Clint forced himself to stand. He had to find help before his body shut down completely. He stumbled along the beach, until he saw a light in the distance, a house. He staggered toward it and began pounding on the door. "Help, please! Help me!" An elderly man opened the door and saw this young soldier, soaking wet, blue from cold, barely able to stand. "My God, son, what happened to you?" "Plane crash," Clint managed to say through chattering teeth. "In the ocean." The man, whose name was Harold Peterson, immediately brought Clint inside, wrapped him in blankets, and called for medical help. "You swam from where?" Peterson asked in disbelief. 5 miles, Clint said. "Maybe more." "Son, that's impossible. Nobody survives that." But Clint had survived it. The Coast Guard arrived within an hour. They had been notified about the missing plane, but had assumed both men were dead. Finding Clint alive was a miracle. "What about the pilot?" they asked. Clint's heart sank. "I don't know. I lost sight of him right after we crashed." Ray Ellis's body was never found. Clint was taken to the base hospital and treated for severe hypothermia and exhaustion. The doctors were amazed that he had survived. "Young man," said Dr. William Thompson, "you should be dead. The combination of cold water, distance, and time in the ocean, we've never seen anyone survive those conditions." "I guess I'm tougher than I thought," Clint said. But the experience had changed him profoundly. He had looked death in the face and survived. Nothing would ever seem as frightening again. When Clint returned to duty a week later, word of his survival had spread throughout the base. He was treated as something of a hero. Eastwood's the guy who swam 5 miles in the Pacific. Soldiers would whisper, "Toughest son of a gun in the army." But Clint didn't feel like a hero. He felt like someone who had been given a second chance at life. The crash had taught him something important. When faced with impossible odds, you don't quit, you keep fighting until you find a way to survive. This lesson would serve him well in his later career. When directors told him a stunt was too dangerous, Clint would think back to that night in the ocean. When critics said he couldn't act, he remembered swimming through hypothermia toward those distant lights. In 1955, when Clint moved to Hollywood to pursue acting, he carried the confidence of a man who had already faced the ultimate test and passed. When casting directors rejected him, when agents wouldn't represent him, when he struggled to find work, he never gave up. He had already survived the worst night of his life. The plane crash also gave Clint a unique relationship with fear. Other actors might be afraid of heights, afraid of dangerous stunts, afraid of difficult roles. Clint had already faced death and won. When Sergio Leone asked him to perform dangerous stunts in spaghetti westerns, Clint's answer was simple: "I've done worse." When Dirty Harry required him to perform his own action sequences, Clint didn't hesitate. After swimming 5 miles in the Pacific Ocean, jumping from a moving car seemed easy. The experience also gave him a philosophy that would define his career: control what you can control, accept what you can't, and never stop fighting. In the ocean that night, Clint couldn't control the cold, the distance, or the waves, but he could control his effort, his determination, and his refusal to give up. Years later, when Clint became a director, he brought the same mentality to filmmaking. Problems on set, difficult actors, budget constraints. None of it seemed insurmountable to a man who had survived the impossible. In 1971, when Clint was asked about his fearlessness in performing stunts, he told the story of the plane crash for the first time publicly. "When you've been that close to death," he said, "everything else seems manageable." The interviewer asked him what went through his mind during those 4 hours in the ocean. "Simple," Clint replied. "Just keep swimming. Everything else was noise." This became his life philosophy. When faced with any challenge, any obstacle, any setback, the answer was always the same: just keep swimming. In 1992, when Clint won his first Oscar for Unforgiven, he dedicated part of his acceptance speech to Ray Ellis. "This is for all the people who don't make it back," he said. "Sometimes survival is just luck, but sometimes it's will." The plane crash of September 3, 1951, created the Clint Eastwood the world would come to know. The man who never backed down, never showed fear, never quit. But more than that, it created a man who understood the value of life. Every day after that crash was a gift, a bonus, an opportunity to do something meaningful. When Clint was asked in 2008, at age 78, what kept him motivated to keep working, his answer was simple: "I died when I was 21. Everything since then has been extra time." The young soldier who climbed into that plane in 1951 was just another kid from Oakland. The man who crawled out of the Pacific Ocean 4 hours later was destined to become a legend. Because on that dark night, floating in the cold Pacific, Clint Eastwood learned the most important lesson of his life. When everything is taken away from you, when death is staring you in the face, when all hope seems lost, you don't quit. You just keep swimming. And sometimes, if you're tough enough, determined enough, and lucky enough, those distant lights on the shore will get closer. Sometimes, you make it home.